Where'd Melanie go? Okay. And I'm about to record. Okay, I believe we're going live. Yay! Okay, great. All right, welcome everyone. And go to the page. Okay. Starting.
Where can we share it from?
I'm sharing it right now. I'm starting it on I started a Facebook watch, like a watch party. So that's showing right now. And
from your personal page?
It's on the actual page. Yeah. Okay, great. So awesome. Super excited. I'm glad we got that out the way and we figured that out. Let me close this up really quickly. Okay. So I'm going to keep this here so that I'm able to see some of the messages coming through. Okay, awesome. So let's start getting live one. Okay, great. All right, so welcome y'all to our second episode of Let's Unpack. This is our Roundtable series, and we're going to be talking about the African presence in the Caribbean. I want to go ahead and introduce our speakers. We got an awesome panel of women today. And so I will start off with Melanie Maldonado. Melanie is a Bombera activist, independent scholar with doctoral training in performance studies. She's an alumni of the Smithsonian Latino Museum Studies program and has served as a researcher for the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. Melanie organizes the biennial Bomba Research Conferences, 8 since 2005 under the banner name of Propa in Chicago and Puerto Rico, and has provided slang editing for 2 books of Nuyorican poetry and has 6 publications to her name. In 2011, she started a Lugares Históricos project, which highlighted Black history sites in Puerto Rico. In 2018, Melanie organized and led first of its kind community tour of these ancestral spaces, and in 2019 began placing historical markers at these locations of importance for African diasporic gathering and traditional practices. She is a state-appointed grant reviewer for arts and culture in Florida and is active with different organizations in her local community, including serving as a founding member for Escuela de Bomba y Plena Tata Cepada in Kissimmee. Next, we have Sulma Arzu Brown. Sulma Arzu Brown is a proud Garifuna and Afro-Latina born in Honduras, Central America. The Garifuna people are the Black Caribs who were forcibly deported from the islands of St. Vincent and the Grenadines by the British in 1797. Sulma is a self-published author of the award-winning book, Bad Hair Does Not Exist, Pelo Malo No Existe, and My Hair Comes With Me Shifting the Paradigm of What Success Looks Like. Both ordains body of work and tools of empowerment for children and for adults. All her books are about uplifting and uniting the Afro diaspora and teaches the world the beauty of diversity. And then we also have, Emily Wells. She is a creator by all definition, a writer, seamstress, and an entrepreneur with an event planning business with her sister. Through all the work that she does, her goal is to proudly and honorably represent her culture and be a voice for the voiceless of those who haven't found their voice yet. Welcome, ladies. I'm super excited to have you all here. So we're gonna go ahead and just get into it. We're gonna get into the first topic. I know that we're gonna cover a lot of ground today. We're gonna try to cover as much as we can within an hour. And for those who are watching, just so you guys know, my name is Marilyn Camacho. I'm the founder and president of Caribeña Creatives. We are a boutique studio located in Los Angeles, dedicated to amplifying Caribbean narratives and voices. So now I know that when we talk about the African presence and the history in the Caribbean, And everybody usually talks about slavery. However, slavery didn't look the same for everyone's ancestry represented at this table. If we can briefly go around really quick, where is everybody originally from? Where's everyone from? So Sulma?
Yeah, sure. So I am originally from the Bay. I'm from Honduras. I'm a proud Garifuna woman. And I am also an Afro-Latina because Honduras sits in a Latin country. It's a Latin country, right? So I'm currently residing in the Bronx. I've been here since the age of 6. So I'm a Bronxite. I'm going absolutely nowhere. I feel like if I leave my community, that's called brain drain. And I am going to make sure that there are examples for our young people to always follow. And the majority of my Garifuna people are here in the Bronx.
Okay. And Melanie, what about you? Where are you from?
I was born and raised in Chicago, so were my parents, but all 4 of my grandparents were born and raised in Puerto Rico and then met out here in the diaspora. And well, I'm also a genealogist, and I can just say that my family has been in Puerto Rico for hundreds of years. And so the mixtures go way, way back.
And Emily, what about you?
Well, I was born in New York, but both of my parents are from the Dominican Republic, and their family are what Dominicans call cocolos. They arrived to the Dominican Republic to work in the sugar factories, and then they settled and had families there.
Wow. So it's amazing. I love that we have such a diverse group of women here. I'm also Puerto Rican. Melanie, me and you kind of go back. We're both from Chicago. So we are familiar with each other in our work. And, you know, I think that I would like to start it off with Sulma. I think that your history is so interesting. You know, it's crazy because I didn't really know much about the Garifuna culture, the people, the history. And you blew my mind recently with some information. And I was like, wow, we got to bring you on here to talk about this because I don't think enough people know about that ancestry. So, you know, tell us everything. You know, I'm super excited to learn. So.
No, I love that you asked, Marilyn. It's such an honor to be here. I didn't even get to tell you. So I want to thank you first and foremost for sharing this platform with each and every one of us and allowing connect, right? And bring this hermandad back together again. So like you mentioned, I love speaking about my culture. I'm a proud Garifuna woman from Honduras. And the Garifuna people, I like to say our motherland is St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So it was the last island in the Caribbean to get colonized by the British because our Garifuna people consistently fought for our land. We understood the riches that were there. As a matter of fact, when we went into war, our Chief Joseph Chatouillier would say, you know, do not fight near our plantations because when we win, we have to be able to cosechar, you know, cosechar nuestra tierra, which means we have to be able to replant, you know, what's in our land. So we need to honor the land, right? So fight away from it. It wasn't until the Second Carib War when the British actually plotted and killed our Chief Joseph Chatouillier, and the Garifuna people waved the of surrender. It was about 5,000 of us that survived, and what happened was the goal was to kill us all off. So the goal was genocide. They put the Garifuna people in a nearby island called Balisu, which present day today only reptiles can survive. Half of my population perished, all right? I'll let you know. 2,248 of us survived. That's 722 men, 806 women, and 720 children, okay? The British literally like archived this. These are all real numbers to date. And so what was the next goal? Okay, the strong have survived. So let's see if we could sell these Black people off to slavery. So they put us in 11 convoy ships to go to the Americas to get enslaved. I call it divine intervention. We ended up in a nearby island called Roatán. It was not a part of Honduras, but it is now. And we just, I don't know how my ancestors navigated themselves to Honduras and La Tierra. And the Spanish people, the Latinos at that time, just left us alone. They left us in the coastland, right? Without enslaving us, so which is why we have our own language. So the Garifuna language is still intact till this day. Wow. Yeah, Balenuagu, that means how are you? You know, Walagati means our heritage, our inheritance. Sorry, so and from Honduras, we went to Guatemala, Belize, and Nicaragua. So since Belize is the only English colonized country in Central America, they are not Afro-Latinos, they're English Garifuna, right, or Caribbean. We came to the Americas in the 1930s through merchant marine. The Garifuna people first ended up in Harlem because we are Black, so we wanted to be in a place where the people looked like us, but we had a hard time communicating because we spoke Spanish. Right, so that's when the majority of us started coming to the Bronx, which was predominantly Latino, predominantly Puerto Rican, and we were able to communicate and settle here. So in New York alone, we have over 100,000 Garifunas living in the Bronx. The Garifuna people from Belize, they're closer to the West Indian culture, so they live in Brooklyn, most of them, but the Latinos live here in the Bronx. So that's my history in a nutshell, right? And again, I'll tell you a cute little fact. When Anthony Bourdain, may he rest in peace, came to the Bronx, he actually came to taste the Garifuna traditional food.
Wow. Which is what? Like what type of,
So it's called hudutu. It's also known as machuca, and it's a coconut-based seafood stew, and we have it with a side of mashed plantains, which some cultures will call mango, or others mofongo. We just mash the plantains. Oh my God, it's the most delicious. So when you come to New York, you gotta make sure you have hudutu.
And you know the language, like, you know this language, you know some of the, like, is this something that was passed down to you from your parents? Like, is it, or like, did you learn, like, how did you learn this language? Was this something that was already inherited in your family? Like, was it passed down, or was it something that you kind of had to seek out and learn for yourself?
It was definitely passed down. I have a whole village in Honduras right now to present day. You go there and they're speaking the Garifuna, right? It's something that is spoken in the house often. However, when we came, and it's passed down through generations from generation, but there was a point where I had to kind of relearn the language, because when my father, for example, he tells the story of when he went to the city in Honduras to study, when he started speaking his language, what we would consider mulatto or the vanilla Latinos will make monkey sounds and make fun of the fact that this Black guy was talking his goo 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 language. So he didn't want his children to go through the same type of bullying. So when we came here to the United States of America, they spoke to us mostly in Spanish, and we had to learn English. But when you come around my family, even to this day, everybody is speaking Garifuna for the most part.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You just blew my mind. Wow. And you know, it's so interesting because like you guys were able to retain that all of that culture, right? It's getting passed down. And I think that's also a big difference between, you know, our ancestry, us being enslaved, right? Our ancestors being enslaved, and how some of us, we weren't able to keep a lot of those cultures, the traditions, the language. And you all were able to do that. Like, that's incredible, you know? I'm blown away by this. And I mean, I'm gonna pass it over to Melanie, because I know Melanie, you know, it's when we talk about Puerto Rico, you know, and we know the history of Puerto Rico and the Tainos, the Caribs, the Arawaks, when they all, and the Igneri as well, those were the original inhabitants, the natives of the Caribbean at that time. But I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to you, girl, because I know you know your stuff. You know, you're breaking it down for us, you know, tell us things. So tell us, you know, Melanie, what do you think is like, when we're talking about the history of the Caribbean in Puerto Rico, where do we start?
Well, I think when we're talking about or when we're trying to connect to an African diasporic experience, Puerto Rico often gets discounted, and we're considered kind of the white Hispanophone country, the white Spanish-speaking part of the Caribbean. And it's really interesting because, in fact, the because of a real cédula in the mid 1600s, Spain actually offered liberty and land to Africans and their descendants if they would come to Puerto Rico and populate the island. And so you have a large influx of people coming to Puerto Rico, either because they were cimarrones or because they had gained their freedom. And they settled in Puerto Rico around the capital, which initially was elsewhere in the island, but by the time this influx begins, it's San Juan, and so they kind of settle on the outskirts of San Juan and create a community there that they named San Mateo de Cangrejos. And San Mateo de Cangrejos was the first town founded in Puerto Rico, and if I remember correctly, in that area, founded by free blacks. So that this town is founded in 1773. It lasts almost 100 years and really is a nucleus of Black culture in the island. And when Puerto Ricans, when we tell our story, we always kind of regurgitate this romantic narrative taught to us by the colonizer, right? This very westernized version of the conquistador, the enslaved African, and the Taino. And so that kind of triad of Boricua history is just that. It's meant to erase. It's meant to put people in certain disproportionate positions within the narrative. But in fact, free blacks were a huge part of settling the island and particularly the area in the north part of the island. And so as we retell our story, we often will tell, well, I come from Spaniard, I'm part Spaniard, I'm part African, enslaved African, and then I'm also part Taino. But it really negates and it really erases this entire history of agency, of empowerment of people who came, who were free, who were libertos, who eran negro liberto, and they came and they settled, they created communities that lasted, they had economic power, and they had such an important presence that San Juan said, you know what? There's something with this area. You know what? We're gonna make this part of San Juan. And so they dissolved that town, split it up, and kind of parceled it out to the other municipalities. And then there was a Spaniard who said, a Spaniard of power in the island in the late 1800s. And he said, because the San Mateo de Cangrejos lasted until the 1862, I believe. So he says, hey, I'm from this part of Spain called Santurce, and I'd like to rename this area by that name. And so there comes another method of erasure of the Black history in Puerto Rico. And so we know today that Santurce is kind of a seat of Black identity in the island, but it's not because of its history so much as it is because of the concentration that it has maintained of Black families. And so that entire history has been erased of San Mateo de Cangrejos, that entire history of free Blacks settling the island. I believe it's in the 1700s that at least half the population of the island was Black. And then the island was becoming too Black for the Spaniards. And so they started now offering the same deal that they had offered to Blacks throughout the Caribbean. They said, whoa, we need to whiten, we need to whiten our population. So they started offering land to Europeans. And so then you have this huge influx in the 1800s of Europeans who come and kind of are brought in specifically to whiten the island because they were too Black. The population was half Black. And so it was too Black for the Spaniards. So the families that have, in my case, my families, most of my family branches have been intact in Puerto Rico for at least 200 years. So my mixtures go way back to these times when people were coming, free Blacks, and then later this large influx of Europeans. So it's something we're not taught as Puerto Ricanos. So we don't tell our own story in that way. We kind of tell this colonized narrative of the superior, Spaniard, the conquistador. You even see it in the romanticized imagery with the helmet and whatnot. And then you see the Black person with a chain or some other kind of imagery that communicates that that person's a slave. So, the narrative that we even retell is colonized. And so that's part of what, if we learn our actual history, if we learn our actual history, then we can be part of decolonizing that narrative and telling the true story of our ancestors and giving them the agency and the power that they had to move throughout the Caribbean and settle and create economic power in an area that became so desirable that the government said, you know what, that what you're doing is too good over there. We need some of that. And we dismantled that. So we need to know these stories so that we can retell them.
And imagine how much healing we would get from knowing this. I remember when you had mentioned this to me when we had spoken a few weeks ago, we were talking about putting together this, this discussion, this panel, and you blew my mind with that, Melanie. I had never known about that, and I have a couple of, books here on the history of the Caribbean, and they never mentioned any of that, so I'm just curious to know, how did you come across this information? Was this something that you had been researching, or because I know that you do a lot of work, I know that you're currently in Miami, but I know that you were doing a lot of work in Chicago and also going back and forth to Puerto Rico. Where did this come from? How are you able to unearth this information?
That kind of doesn't have one root. I can tell you, being a third generation Boricua in Chicago, with all my friends being second generation, all those second generation Boricuas knowing how to speak Spanish. I didn't know how to speak Spanish and felt very isolated from that experience culturally. It was kind of a confluence of feeling a dissociation from my culture, from my ancestral culture, from my ethnicity, and just deciding when I was young, I'm gonna be an expert in Puerto Rican culture. I don't even know what that is, if you can get a job doing that, but that's what I'm gonna be, because I need to know about me. I need to know about my people. So that was part of it. The other part is just genealogies help so much. I've learned so much. I had a grandfather, and he's deceased, but he used to tell me, mi familia, nosotros somos taínos, y ese pelo que tú tienes, ese pelo negro, y eso viene de tu abuela, la familia de ella era negra. And so that's how I learned about Black history growing up. It was a very racist, oppressive narrative that I was given about myself. And that, and it was always with this disdain, ese pelo que tú tienes, ese no es pelo de nosotros, ese no es pelo de mi familia, nosotros somos taínos, ese pelo negro. And so that's, I just thought, okay, I've been trained to know by my society, by my larger community, that I have, I'm part Black at some point. I'm an Afrodescendiente of sometime in history. But now my grandfather's giving me a clue. He thinks he's hurting me, but he's actually empowering me, because now I know which branch of the family to start looking for this information on. And when my grandmother died, I went full on into that genealogy so that I could learn. And now it's become such a big part of the work that I do around Bomba. And I feel like it's so important to help people connect with their ancestors, and then to give voice to those ancestors. I mean, look at all those people that I told you, Sol Negro y Liberto, that they created such an important part of Puerto Rico that has been erased from our history. We have to give voice to those ancestors and tell their stories, because they've been erased from the books. They've been erased from the social memory. They've been erased from the narrative, and we have to do that. And so genealogy has helped me do that, has helped me connect people with their stories and help them kind of frame and create and nurture their stories. So.
Amazing. Emily, I know you have a very distinct part of history that you wanted to share. And again, I was blown away because I was like, I didn't know about this either. I'm like, damn, man, you got to do some work. But please, the floor is yours.
Okay. So my ancestors are what Dominicans call cocolos. Cocolos came to the Dominican Republic to work in the sugar factories, en el ingenio del azúcar. And when they arrived to the Dominican Republic, there's different versions of how the term cocolo came about, but the one that is most told is that when the Ingleses arrived to the Dominican Republic, they a lot of them were from Tortola, which is the biggest of the British Virgin Islands where they came from. So when they were saying Tortola to the Dominicans, they couldn't pronounce it, they couldn't understand it, so they in short called it cocolos. So the name stuck. Cocolos were discriminated because they spoke English, they were Black. In the sugar factories, they had preference over the Dominicans because they spoke English, and most of the sugar factories were owned by Americans or foreigners, so they could communicate. So when Trujillo took power, he bought most of the sugar factories that were owned by foreigners or by Americans, but the one where my family's from and where my family worked in La Romana, they didn't want to sell. So they stayed and they continued employing the cocolos, again, because of the language, and they had better roles. They worked mostly in mechanics, like in the machinery, and they brought with them all their traditions, their foods, their danza, their arts, their goloja, which is still very dominant in the Dominican Republic. They established schools, church. They brought everything with them. They played cricket. Another one of the big customs that they established in DR was the Christmas celebration, when they went around. They'll start in one house, they'll eat and drink there, then they'll go to the other one, and that family would join, and they would continue, and that's how they would celebrate Christmas all the way up to New Year's. And yeah, the dancing, the
Culture as well. We have the, yeah.
the gulochas, they would
Navideñas, so we go from house to house.
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, the cocolos are very proud people. They were respected because they had impeccable work ethics. They were very family oriented. They were very, even though Trujillo himself, who was racist, he employed cocolos because they had, like, their math skills were out of this world. They were known to be very intelligent and leaders in a way.
Wow. And that's still a very active population now in the Dominican Republic.
Well, the elders are worrying because it's dying down. The history isn't being shared as much. Se están muriendo los viejos, so it's like the traditions are starting to be lost. And yeah.
Are you trying to keep up those traditions?
Definitely. Most of the cocolos now are in San Pedro, which is where they mostly settled, in San Pedro and La Romana. So San Pedro is like where all the history is, and yeah.
Wow. My God, so amazing. I want to backpedal really quick on, backtrack a little bit on what you were talking about, Melanie, about Pelo Malo, right? And it's so interesting because, you know, Sulma here, she wrote a book, obviously, as I introduced her, about Pelo Malo. So my God, that whole thing is so complex, right? I remember being a little girl and, you know, I come from a big family. I have 7 brothers and sisters. And out of all my brothers and sisters, I had the curliest, tightest curls ever out of all of my sisters. And it was a struggle when I was a child. My mom would, I mean, we're talking about pulling, right? My mom never used the term pelo malo. You know, my mom, I will say for me, it was the reverse, right? My mom loved my curls, right? She loved them. But as I grew older and in my teenage years, I always wanted to straighten my hair, right? Because I was like, it's too much. It's too much to deal with. It's a lot of work. I got to do this. I have to prepare it the night before. I got to blow dry it. It was way too much. And in my mind, it was easier. And I think back then, I thought that I looked prettier with straighter hair, you know? So I think that with straight hair. So I think that this is something that a lot of us, especially in the Caribbean, like we, you know, within our Caribbean culture, we deal with this a lot as children. And it's just so crazy. Like now, I love that now, you know, in pop culture and just in everything that we're seeing on Instagram, there's so many companies now, there's so many people and influencers that are embracing their curly hair and embracing that thickness, embracing the natural. And you know, I know, you know, with Sulma, with you, I know that you wrote the book. What was, you know, I know that you wrote it obviously to have something for, because a big part of it is that it's a children's book. So what was your inspiration for this? Like, what was it from a personal experience as well that you had as a little girl?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I wrote it for my own kids, right? But what's interesting about this is that when I was back in my little hometown, my pueblo in Santa Fe, Colón, in Honduras, right, hair was a way we connected with the community because it was all Black people where I lived, right? So if they saw a little girl that it was time to braid her hair, it was like, vení para acá, mutu, que te voy a peinar y te voy a poner bonita, right? So it's like, and once the neighbor did the little girl's hair, they'd be like, aquí tenés un pan, le mandas a tu mamá. You know, like it was just a way that just we connected with community. And it wasn't until I came to the United States of America and my mom started chemically straightening my hair, I ended up going to the Dominican hair salons. And that's when I heard the term pelo malo, right? And I would always be like, pelo malo, what's that, right? Like it just never resonated until I became a mom, right? So of course, as a mom, it's very important for us to find the right caregiver for our children. And I found that person. She understood our values, our tradition, and she would also help me with my daughter's hair. I was grateful because I'm super busy. And one day, Bella had taken all her hair apart. Her hair was tousled, and I realized that the babysitter has had a long day because the comment that she said to me was, "Ay, Zulma, lísale el pelo a la niña porque ese es pelo malo," which means relax your daughter's hair because it's bad hair, right? And my children are very perceptive. She was 3.5 years old, but I could tell when their feelings get hurt or they get embarrassed. They feel a lot more than we think they feel. So, you know, I looked at all the kids, I looked at my daughter, and I said, Suma, respond from a place of love, right? Because you're gonna be that example. So I started saying, you know, con todo respeto, hay pelo largo, hay pelo corto, hay pelo ondulado, hay toda clase de pelo y todo pelo es bueno, right? So I told her, I said, you know what, let me find a book that I can come and read to the kids and we can continue to empower, not just my daughter, but all the children under your care. And it opened up such a beautiful dialogue. She expressed to me that she was, that her dad was an Afro-Latino from Puerto Rico, but whenever he would comb his hair, she would always hear her dad saying, pelo malo, pelo malo. Her dad had no idea she would be responsible for hundreds of kids in a predominantly Black and Latino community like the South Bronx, right? So I said, it's gonna stop with you and I. And what I realized was that was literally a colloquial term. And it was up to her and I to work together to stop it and end it. Words are very powerful. Words can help, are like water. They can destroy or they can make you grow. Right? So it was important for our children to understand how beautiful they are with proper terminology. So the book is called Pelo Malo No Existe. It was written in Spanish first because the conversation was held in Spanish. Then we quickly translated it to English. One of my closest friends, Isidra Savio, another proud Garifuna woman from Honduras, did all of the illustrations. And once we launched this book, so many stories came out, so many stories of I can finally breathe, somebody understands me type of stories. People got to see themselves, and we got to, you know, showcase our community in the most positive light. We wanted to make sure that every cover, every color of Nubian was seen, how we interact with each other, how we pass on traditions. So the images is me and the illustrator offsetting the media messages about ourselves, right? So we want to own our own narrative. We want to tell our story. We want to tell you what we see in our community, and you will see how much we have in common with yours. The only difference between the books that my children have had to have in their book collection, the Disney, right, and the ones I write is literally my protagonist, non-negotiable, all women of color. Everyone in that book is going to be, you know, is going to be represented, of a representative of my community.
And Melanie, what about you? As far as you know, did you reach a certain point where you're like, I'm going to embrace my natural curly hair, or was it a process?
I always, you know, I kind of say this with pride and embarrassment at the same time, but I'm a very low maintenance person in terms of like makeup and hair. Like if I spend $10 on makeup an entire year, like that's a lot. So, and I played basketball. I was always in sports, so it didn't even make sense for me to undergo some of the hair routines that some of my friends did. I also grew up in a very Black and brown community, and so a lot of other people look like me, or you know, so it wasn't that standard. Just wasn't a pressure for me. Now my daughter, her hair is even, I've lost a lot of my curls over the years, but her hair is as curly as mine was 20 years ago and even curlier. And so, you know, early on, she was going through some of those very struggles, like all her friends were, had straight hair, Latina, but you know, Latinos with straight hair. And so she couldn't understand like why she couldn't also. And so that was my first time like really dealing with that issue. And I thought, oh my goodness, I really need to empower her, and I need to teach her that this is beautiful, and that she, you know, this is something desirable and beautiful because it's you, period. And the next person is, you know, beautiful because it's her, because that's the way that she looks and that she was created. And so I can't say that I necessarily went through that myself, but I definitely have been going through it with my daughter. So that's been an interesting experience. And she loves her hair now. And just like Sulma, from the time my kids were babies, every book that I bought, every doll that I bought, every action figure, always, where's the black? Where's the black? Is there a brown? Okay, no. And if there wasn't, I just didn't buy it. And so that is the norm in my household. My kids have grown up looking at those as representations of themselves all around them. And so that's the way that I've chosen to kind of empower my children and help them know that who they are is beautiful and worthwhile.
And it's interesting, really quickly, even with the dolls, as my daughter was growing up, it was just like mommy and our nuclear family, our immediate family, understood that they were not allowed to get any dolls for my daughters unless it reflected my daughter's beauty. However, we have families, you know, we have friends that are vanillas of, now if they came to my house with a doll, then we'll accept it because it's a reflection of who they are and they're part of our circle as well. And I remember telling my daughters, listen, they wanted me to buy dolls that did not look like them. And I said, I'm not gonna buy a doll that does not look like you until I see a vanilla little girl holding a black doll in some way, shape, or form. And I kept to that promise. We saw a little vanilla girl with a black doll. I pointed it out to my daughters, and I quickly took her to the toy store. I'm like, all right, pick whatever doll you want. Mommy's not gonna interfere, but I'm going to keep my word and my promise to you. And I remember my daughter, culture is very important. So that's non-negotiable. That has been instilled from the very beginning. And I remember when I finally, cut off all my hair, it was literally because it was a hot, humid summer day. I was about to go to Atlantic City with my family, and I just literally wanted to submerge myself in water and not have to worry about my hair. So I told my beautician, quítamelo todo, córtamelo todo, right? And they were so afraid. I'm like, if you don't do it, pass me the scissors, because I will. I'm tired, right? So when I came home that day, the first person to see me was my older daughter, Suleni. And what she did was remarkable. She took a sigh of relief and she said, "Mommy, we finally look alike." I've been telling her how beautiful she was since she was in my stomach. You know, I had no idea that she was really struggling to be more like me. As I took her to the salon while I chemically straightened or put rolos on my hair and blew out my hair, this little girl was trying to figure herself out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a moment of empowerment. Yeah.
And what about you, Emily? Have you dealt with this?
Well, for me, what I didn't, I forgot to add this into the history portion of it. But I grew up knowing my Blackness, loving my Blackness. My parents, they made sure that I knew my history, that I knew my roots, and that I was comfortable with it. And so then when I enter school and I am surrounded by a bunch of Dominicans that didn't understand their Blackness, it was difficult for me. I didn't form any childhood connections because I always felt like I was in the middle between my Dominican or Latino classmates and my Black classmates. And anytime that a Dominican and a Black got into an argument, the racial jokes and slurs would come. And then I'm there in the middle and my Dominican friends would be like, "Why are you getting offended? You're not Black. You're dark skinned, you're morenita, but you're not Black." And then when I would hang out with my Black classmates, it's like, "Oh yeah, you're one of us, but not really." Like kind of like you're still up there. You speak funny, you have an accent, you watch Don Francisco, things like that. So I grew up very proud of my Blackness, but when you're in a space where everyone is pretty much telling you to hate your Blackness, little things seep into your minds without you realizing it. So I used to tell my mom, I just want my hair down. She used to braid my hair and I would have like colitas everywhere. And I'm like, I just want to have my pajón out. That's what I want. And she would be like, "But you have a lot of hair. If I leave your pajón out, it's gonna be a tangled mess." So one day we went to the salon. It was my first communion. She asked the salon lady, "Que me hiciera to do a moño?" And the lady tells her, "Oh, this is abuse. You should relax her hair. That's too much hair." And all these tangles, like, just relax it. And I'm like, if that's what it takes for my hair to be loose and out, then let's do it, Mom. Relax my hair. And I kept telling her, like, relax my hair. And she eventually complied. And because at this point I had long straight hair, when in school, that was a distinction. Like, "Oh yeah, you're definitely Dominican because your hair looks like this." And it allowed me inclusion with the Dominicans because they were like, "Oh yeah, she's definitely, she fits the hair beauty standard."
Right. Wow. I mean, speaking of all this, right, I think a lot of things come up for me, right? We talk about, and a lot of people now are talking about colorism, right? Anti-Blackness, identity within our cultures. And I feel like one thing that always, people talk about Afro-Latinidad, and then there is Afrodescendencia. And, Melanie actually, she gave me this information that, mostly on the islands. And I actually started talking to my cousins in Puerto Rico and they're like, "Yeah, Marilyn, they don't, we don't say that out here. We say Afrodescendencia." And so I wanted to talk about that for a minute because I think that there's a lot of discussions happening right now about Afro-Latinidad and what that means and who can claim it and who can't claim it, right? And then I think that there's also people who are lighter skinned like myself, right? But clearly I have indigenous, I definitely have African influence features in my makeup and my whole physical makeup. And there's other people that probably feel the same way and they feel like, can I claim that? Can I actually claim saying that I'm Afro-Latino? Can I honor my ancestors? And then of course we have those people that say, "Oh, well, I got one grandfather that's Black, or half my mom is Black and my dad is lighter skin," or, so what do we think about that? I mean, I would want to hear from you on this first, Melanie, because I know that you brought this up and that there's actually somebody you said that's actually teaching this in Puerto Rico, or should I say dissecting la afrodescendencia de gente con la piel clara. So let's talk about this because I feel like this is coming up. It's a very sensitive subject for a lot of people. And I understand why. But what are your thoughts on this? As far as like, what is the difference, right? Is there a difference?
So it is a hotly contested topic, even in Puerto Rico. So, you know, being in the States and having all of these different filters here in the States, the one drop rule, the but you act black or you talk black or you know, all of these different kind of realms of inclusion and exclusion. It's just a different experience in Puerto Rico. I mean, in Puerto Rico, there is already the narrative that you are part black. So that, unlike here in the States, you're white or black, but not both necessarily. And so, you know, there have been a lot of complex conversations happening in the island for a long time. And something that we were talking about was that for a while now, there has been a movement, a celebration, and the use of the term Afrodescendiente, which I think is actually a very beautiful term because it is not based on phenotype. It is not based on the way you look. It is literally who your ancestors are. It is giving you a term to claim, I am descended from people who were from Africa at some point. And so it is a term of inclusion. And so people who are all kinds of manifestations of their ancestors can use the term. And I was telling you that at my most recent Bomba Research Conference last year, one of the presenters was talking about this terminology and saying that he's a very dark-skinned cangrejero, and he's one to tell you, like, he will not use the word Santurce or Santurcino. He's cangrejero. But his name is Lester Nurse Allende, and so he was talking about being an Afrodescendiente, and that for his own grandson or his own grandchild, he didn't want his own family, his own descendants to be kind of excluded from that Black history, because he very clearly is Black, but that isn't so clear with his grandchild. And so he was saying that, you know, it's important for everybody who to claim that and to know it, if they know it, to claim it. And that in his grandchild's case, that he said, you know, my grandchild is an Afrodescendiente de piel claro. That's it. It's just, he's still an Afrodescendiente, and the fact that he has piel claro doesn't exclude him from his ancestors and from me and from my people and from where we come. So, you know, but there's still poles. There are different polar views on this, and even in Puerto Rico about who is Black. I definitely feel comfortable using Afrodescendiente because I know my family history and I've done the genealogy. I've invested the time, I've invested the work. We have oral history, I have DNA evidence. I know all of what enough of what I need to know to feel like I can claim that. Now, you know, here in the States, it's a little bit different because somebody might say it's okay for me to say that I'm Black. And in Puerto Rico, that isn't necessarily the case, because in Puerto Rico, to claim that you are Black is an experience of visibility. And so this issue of visibility is why I think Afrodescendencia has gained such currency, because it is about ancestry. And not just visibility. And so you can be Black and Afrodescendiente, you can be light-skinned and Afrodescendiente, you can be, you know, and most of us will say, right, we have families that, our families kind of, and you hear the word like, look like the rainbow, or we have all kinds of colors in our family. You hear that a lot in Latino communities. But I think it's a term really, and some people feel otherwise, but I feel it's a term of inclusion. And I definitely talk to my children about this. I talk to them about their ancestors. I show them on a map. This is where some of our ancestors come from. I take them to, you know, art shows and other cultural experiences, other Caribbean festivals, and say, you know, they're cousins for this reason, like culturally, they're cousins because our ancestors have a shared experience. We come from the same place. We have a common reason that puts us in the Caribbean. And so my children definitely know they're Afrodescendientes, and actually identify more with a Black identity than not. So it's a term that has gained such currency and such has been embraced so much in Puerto Rico that years in 2015 some thinkers and artists and leaders and scholars and activists and cultural workers, they came together and put together a conference called Afrodescendencia en Puerto Rico. And then they had a second conference in 2018, Afrodescendencia en Puerto Rico. And the next conference is next year, Afrodescendencia en Puerto Rico. And so this is the future, the future of knowing, the future of claiming and not polarizing within our own community, but saying, you know what, I may not be visibly Black, but I am an Afrodescendiente. I'm a proud Afrodescendiente. I'm proud of my ancestors. I'm not going to hide behind the "Y tu abuela dónde está?" Paradigm of I'm trying to hide that part of my Black my ancestry. In fact, I'm going to flip the script on that and claim, before you even ask me if I am, I'm going to tell you I'm an Afrodescendiente because I'm proud of that lineage. And so it's a beautiful kind of conversation that's happening more and more in Puerto Rico. It's I mean, even now, Marta Moreno Vega, who founded the African Diaspora, I don't know if I'm gonna get all the words right, African Diaspora Cultural Center, Caribbean Cultural Center in New York. I know I'm not getting all those letters right. She's living in Puerto Rico now, and she was part of creating and spearheading a movement called Afro Corredor. And so it's this cultural corridor in Puerto Rico that is celebrating Afrodescendence.
Wow.
And so we're seeing this now, but it hasn't always been like this in the Puerto Rican community. We haven't always had these conversations. We haven't always accepted this about who we are.
I love that these conversations are happening, and I wish that this conversation was happening more here. And I love that term. I think it's a beautiful term, and I'm using it. I will say that before I say I'm an Afro-Latina, you know, and I understand that, you know, here within the past couple of years, you know, there has been an Afro-Latino movement here because as you said, it's about visibility, you know, and it's also about experiences. Afro-Latinos, from what, you know, what is shown in the media and what people, when they say what is an Afro-Latino, it's somebody who is Black. It's a Black, it's a Black Latino, you know, visibly, right? So I feel that there's always been people and somebody like myself who just didn't feel totally comfortable claiming that, because I'm like, I know that I have the descendancy in me, right? But I don't know if that's the right term for me to be using, you know, because, and some will argue, you've had people of lighter skin Latinos have certain privileges that darker skin Latinos probably don't have, you know? So I love that they're now using this term in Puerto Rico, and I'm really hoping that we embrace this term here in the United States and we start using it, because for me, that feels accurate, you know? Emily, what do you feel about this? Because I know in New York, you know, New York was a big part of the movement, and I know you're in New York, so are you, Sulma, you know? How do you guys feel about this term, about both of the terms?
Well, for me, before even getting into the term, I know that Dominicans in social media have been dragged lately for their anti-Black views. But I feel that it's important for us to understand where it comes from. I'm not excusing it. I don't stand with it whatsoever. But when Trujillo was in power, he was pushing this white agenda to the max, even though he was part Haitian himself, but he hid that part of himself. And there is the Perejil or Parsley Massacre, which not a lot of Dominicans know about, because Trujillo, he controlled the radio, the media, all the news he controlled. So the Perejil massacre is Trujillo ordered his troops to kill the Haitians in the border of Haiti and DR. Over 15,000 Haitians were killed. Some Dominicans helped hide them, helped them escape, and some ratted them out. So Trujillo's agenda was to make Dominican culture white. He didn't want anyone claiming their blackness. He tampered with history. He hid our history. So just how here in our history books, the history is very whitewashed, it is like that in DR too. So a lot of the ignorance and anti-blackness comes from ignorance and not really knowing. The way the troops were during the Perejil massacre, the way the troops were identifying whether it was a Haitian or a dark Dominican was asking them to say the word Perejil. Haitians can't pronounce the R because of, they speak Creole. So it was more difficult for them to pronounce the R in Perejil. So once they got that wrong, they were killed. And Dominicans knew that claiming your blackness would literally get you killed. Trujillo was a very hateful man. He hated anything with blackness. So that played into the Dominicans negating their blackness. It was pretty much their survival at one point. So then now when we get to the Afro-Latina movement here in New York or in social media, let's say, to me, Afro-Latina was a very personal term because I saw it as a way for the dark Latina who's not, you never see the dark Latina in Telemundo and Univision and none of those channels. The Latina that's not heard, not represented, that doesn't feel beautiful. I wanted those Latinas to see the term and use the term and understand that there's a community of us that do love our history, that do love our blackness, that are here to support, that they are represented. And then I had this conversation, and then it felt like the movement got kind of hijacked in a way because now the representation of Afro-Latina were the white Latinas, because the world is ready to embrace the white Latina who claims her blackness and still physically has the white beauty standards that the world accepts. So for me, it was a little difficult at first, but then I had this conversation with the Brujas of Brooklyn, and they were explaining, I understand they understood how I felt, but they also explained to me, but we are Black, we can eliminate our blackness. Mm-hmm. And if that made sense to me, we can't continue to attach ourselves to these words, like you're Afro-Latina, you're this, you can't say you're this, you can't say you're not. We all have African blood in us. We are what we are. We can eliminate it. So we have to find a way to bridge that gap, work together. When a white Latina is in a space where a dark Latina is not even a thought, not mentioned, not considered, not welcomed, make sure you bring up the dark Latina. We fight for each other. When a dark Latina is in a space where a white Latina is not welcomed, we will do the same. And that's how we bridge the gap, work together. Mm-hmm. Instead of overshadowing each other, we stand side by side and work together.
Yep. Sulma?
I think it's all about truth. What your path and what your truth is. I always envision like my ancestors, if they were standing in front of many of us, right, through the whole colorism spectrum of what Black is. If you're a lighter skin Afrodescendiente or Afro-Latina, right? And if your dark great grandmother was in front of you, how would she feel if you don't say, I'm an Afro-descendant? She would cry, right? She has to pay a hefty price for that skin color, the price that's gonna bring you to this moment right now to get all the opportunities, right? So I think the term is ever evolving, and I have embraced every term that brings us closer and closer together as one, okay? I have Garifunas telling me you shouldn't identify as an Afro-Latina, you are Garifuna, you are Garifuna. I'm like, yeah, I know I'm Garifuna, but Afro-Latina and Afro-Descendiente allows me my relationship with my cousins, with my extended families, those whose ships took them to different lands. And my goal is coming back together, right? And even with my African-American brothers and sisters, and I told myself I was gonna say this during this whole social justice movement. Let me tell you, I came to this country and I assimilated comfortably, just being under the umbrella of Latina, because we all understood that putting ourselves into what this world's perception of Latina is was a lot safer than putting ourselves in under the umbrella of Black, right? So I had to literally come to grips with myself and just start telling my African-American brothers and sisters the same way I tell my Afro-descendiente, my ancestors, just thank you. Thank you for your sacrifices. Thank you for your for your shoulders. Thank you for everything that you had to put up with just to give me, the words through social media to make impact. Like, I'm not getting lynched, right? Like, there's no, I didn't have to, I guess, my breast didn't have to be forced to feed somebody else's kid through. So they suffer from so much, and I think that whatever, bring it back to the term, whatever gets us closer together, whatever closes this division, whatever closes this, Colin Masters agenda.
It's the colonized mentality, which is
we need to do everything possible to make sure that it ends right here and it doesn't go on. And that's going to start with each and every one of us owning our truth and making sure that when we speak our truth, we're seeing all of our ancestors right in front of us when we speak that truth and honor them.
Somebody said a comment that said, you can be all those things. You shouldn't have to pick one, And when we're talking about the colonized mentality, right, it's people, right, our culture, and it's a lot. It's within the Black culture, it's within the Caribbean culture, it's within a lot of Latino cultures, period, where we grow up learning to hate our indigenous roots, and it's sometimes we don't even realize it, right? It's like this programming that's happened throughout generations, right? And it's been passed down. It's passed down from our parents, sometimes our cousins, our uncles, our aunts, just by little remarks here and there, and you don't realize what that really does to your brain until like you get older and you realize like, oh my God, like I need to rewire the way that I'm thinking. So when we do talk about this colonized mentality, right? Hating ourselves for our history, this is a big thing. It's an issue, right? And I think it's also causing a lot of the division that we have just amongst Latinos in general, where we continue to label and label and label, when we really should be on a unified front.
Yeah.
And so,
Marilyn, can I jump in and say
yes,
something?
please.
So I think part of that, the colonizing of that narrative and the erasure of our ancestors, at least in Puerto Rico, part of that too was this narrative that Tainos were decimated, that they are extinct, that they were wiped off the island, and it's not true. It's just not true. There was Taino and African unity, and they created these communities in different parts of the island. And then did they suppress parts of their cultural practices to assimilate and acculturate? Yes. Does that equal extinction of a biological extinction of people? No. But that's part of the narrative, is that just like we say, all Blacks that were in Puerto Rico were enslaved. All the Tainos that we descend from somehow became extinct, but somehow we're also descended from them. So, those conflicting narratives. I also wanted to just circle back and say that first Congreso de la Afrodescendencia in Puerto Rico coincided with UNESCO's Decade of Afrodescendencia that started in 2015 and is meant to be 10 years of worldwide celebration of Afrodescendencia. And we're right in the middle of that. And so it's not a conversation just happening in Puerto Rico, but it's a conversation happening all over the world, where UNESCO is kind of saying, we have to acknowledge this. We have to acknowledge the mother continent. We have to acknowledge our ancestry, our connection to, our tie to that land. And so, that's so important. And I get jumbled sometimes in my head. I just want to go back because I can see the letters in my head. CCCADI, Caribbean Cultural Center and African Diaspora Institute. That's what it is in New York. Mumbling through it.
Melody, I love that you mentioned UNESCO because UNESCO proclaimed the Garifuna language, music, and dance as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. And in Honduras, we also celebrate Afrodescendientes as well. So it's, you know, as we learned these stories, we see how much similarities we have. And just going back to what I had mentioned earlier about owning our own narrative, seriously, Honduras loves showing off the fact that the food is the hudutu, that's the Garifuna food. Honduras loves showing off that we have this beautiful indigenous Garifuna culture, and the dance of all of Honduras is the punta dance, right? P-U-N-T, and the Wanaragua, that's our culture. But if you ask me, are our artifacts sold in the airports? No, we don't have a store in the airport. Okay, we don't have a restaurant in the airport, all right? We just got the first Garifuna mayor in 100 years, literally. He was mayor number 100, a Garifuna mayor, and his predecessor refused to shake his hand because he did not shake the hands of Black Garifuna people. So that is something still, till present day, we're fighting. Our lands are being taken away. Present day, they just kidnapped 4 activists in Honduras 2 weeks ago, and we're trying to fight to get them back. So this is, and these activists are literally the voices behind making sure that they don't take our lands away from us. So this is present day history. This is going on as we speak.
Wow. Well, girls, we're kind of running out of time. So I want to kind of wrap it up on a really positive note. Overall, this has been so enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information with me and the audience and everybody that's watching. There's so many people making comments and they're blown away by all of this information. And I think at the core of this, that's what it's about. It's about educating ourselves. It's about gaining knowledge. It's about talking to each other, right? So, you know, I think that when we talk about the work that we have to do, right, to decolonize our minds, where do we start? Where do we start, right? And I think I just want to go around with everybody, you know, when we talk about having to do this work, you know, where do you begin, you know? And let's just end it on that. So whoever wants to jump in first.
Okay. I think it starts with what we're doing here. I mean, it's been started. I think this is just a way of people catching up, right? Yeah. Where do we continue? How do we continue? Is I don't want anyone that does not look like any one of us here coming out with the story and producing and executive directing the story of the Garifuna people. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay, because we're gonna have problems. All right.
You gotta include us, like, and that's something with Hollywood. That's gonna be the next one. We're gonna talk about Hollywood, but you know, it's about including us in these narratives, right? Like we have to be included, and we need to have these discussions, and people cannot just have free reign over our history.
Yeah,
our identities.
Exactly, right. And the story of the Puerto Ricanos and the Dominicans, like seriously, like it needs to come from this right here. Googling who you are, seriously, like start by that. Educate yourself. If you see somebody in your family and you're wondering where they got their hair from, find out. Like it's so easy, and talk to each other. You know, don't be afraid to have the conversations that will bring you light and will bring you peace, right? And will get you to understand that the reason why something inside you is saying you shouldn't be divided is because you shouldn't be divided, right? So let's listen to that internal voice, support each other. And I love what Emily said. If you're a lighter skinned Afrodescendiente and you happen to, to be this key into corporate environments, into television, into anything, just grab us with you, right? And we'll do the same. Like, let's make sure that we stop the crabs in a barrel mentality, and let's make sure that we're pulling each other up everywhere that we go, and own your truth, and don't let anyone tell you who you are. Find out for yourself. I think that's how we continue the conversation.
Beautiful.
I would agree. These conversations are important, especially when they're centered around love and understanding each other. None of us has all the information. We all have bits and pieces. So having these conversations and putting all the bits and pieces together is how we're gonna learn. And let's teach the youth. Let's invest in the youth. They're the future. Let's teach them the proper history that we have dug to learn. Let's not that whitewash history that we've been taught. Let's teach them to love their Blackness, to love all of their roots, and invest in them. They're the future. Let's end the mentality of adelantar la raza that our culture often says with this generation. Let's not pass those things on.
Mhm.
I think it's important too to check ourselves, check our family members, check our friends, check our coworkers when they make little comments that are so normalized in our culture. And, you know, say, do you realize that you are perpetuating racist paradigms? Do you realize that you're right now acting out your privilege by thinking that it's okay that you say that? Do you realize that you are being oppressive? I mean, I just think it's important to call that out and do so in love, in a way that builds people up, but call it out. Because every time we let it go, we're compounding the normalization of that continued practice, and that has to stop. The other thing is that I think that it's important that when you see a void, you know, come with a solution. Just like Sulma was like, where's a book? I need a book. Boom, she wrote the book.
Yep.
And then, you know, in Puerto Rico, I was, you know, in years of study and years of visiting, we just don't have a culture in Puerto Rico of Black history sites. And so I just thought, like, you know, I'm learning about these things in my research. Why should I hold on to that knowledge? I want everybody to know that this place that they walk by all the time was significant to Black history in Puerto Rico. And we don't have a culture of that here in the island. I'm going to do something about that. Like, I'm going to come to this with a solution. I'm going to do something about it. And if somebody comes after me and does something bigger and better, great. You know why? Because it's making visible what has been invisible. It's making visible what has been erased. It is bringing that voice to the ancestors who have been present in over time and live in us as Afrodescendientes, but have been silenced and erased and invisible. And so, you know, when we see a void, when we see something that needs to change or happen for our people, for our different cultural groups, for our unity, even like Sulma keeps saying, figure, you know, if you can identify the problem, then you know what the solution could be, and be part of that. And I think that that's how we move these conversations along, from just being a conversation to action. And that's where activism is, right? You take action, you take those conversations, you take consciousness and convert it into action. And so I think that that's how we move forward.
Yes, and I'm just going to add this internalized work, which for me is also seeking therapy, going to therapy, or normalizing therapy. I think that that's another thing that within Latino cultures, especially like we just in general, like it's not, I think that a lot of times we've been fed these things as kids, right? We grow up to have these certain beliefs and we don't really understand how that also affects our behaviors and our relationships with people, you know, and even in intimate relationships, you know? So I think that that's another thing, right? We need to normalize therapy, you know, being able to go to therapy and speaking to somebody about whatever frustrations that you're feeling internally or frustrations that you're feeling with your family. Because still to this day, you know, I mean, even if I bring it up to certain family members, they look at that like, what, therapy? Like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit there and pour out my trauma to a complete stranger, you know. But I think that that's also something that we can embrace. So on that note, thank you all so much for being here. This is amazing. And for those that are watching, this is going to be up on our Facebook page and it will be live on our YouTube page tomorrow. So thank you all again for being here, girls. This is incredible. And I really, really appreciate it. So thank you, girls. And to all of you guys that are listening and watching, appreciate you guys tuning in. And stay tuned for the next episode of Let's Unpack.
Amen.
All right.
Love
Bye.
your life, sis. Thank you. This is awesome.
Great.
Oh my God, Melanie, Emily, I learned